It was supposed to be my birthday. Just cake, laughter, family. But when Evelyn looked me straight in the eye and said, "This beggar shouldn't be sitting next to us," something inside me shattered. I remember holding my fork midair, the tremble in my fingers, impossible to hide. The room fell silent, so silent it screamed. My son didn't say a word. He didn't defend me, not even a glance. I excused myself, walked to the bathroom, and cried into a hand towel like a child. Not because her words hurt more than usual, but because this time, he let them. And that was the moment I knew I was finally alone. Let me know where you're listening from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if this story speaks to you, share your thoughts below. Don't skip, because what happens at the end will surprise you more than the betrayal itself. The drive home from the restaurant was just 12 minutes, but I remember every second. The streetlights slicing through the windshield, the sharp ache behind my eyes. I didn't play music, just silence and that awful spinning thought. How did it get this bad? The sky was that kind of pale gray you see before a storm, and somehow it fit. It matched the emptiness I felt. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't even bother to turn off the engine right away. Just sat there, hands on the wheel, replaying her voice in my head. That voice sharp, always amused, always looking down on me like I was a pet that kept misbehaving. This beggar shouldn't be sitting next to us. As if I hadn't paid the down payment on the house she was sitting in. As if I hadn't once given up every ounce of comfort to help her husband, my son, get through medical school. That part always gets me. The sacrifices. I didn't just carry him, I carried us. After his father died, I didn't have a map. No blueprint, just bills and a boy who needed me, and I showed up, every day, for him. I sold my wedding ring to keep the lights on once. I worked through pneumonia, wrapped in layers, shaking behind the register at the corner pharmacy, because sick days weren't paid. There were nights I would sit on the floor of the bathroom, door locked, crying silently because I didn't want him to hear. I never let him see how hard it was. I wanted him to believe in the world, that good people could survive it, that love was enough. I remember the way he used to look at me, eyes full of admiration, like I was a hero. When he got accepted into residency, he hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. He whispered, "You're the reason I made it, Mom." And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. But Evelyn saw me as a burden the minute she stepped into our lives. She was beautiful, I won't lie. Sharp jawline, perfect hair teeth like the ones you only see in whitening commercials. But her smile never reached her eyes. And those eyes? They always scanned me like I was clutter. She didn't understand us. Me. And over the years, she didn't try. What stung wasn't that she disliked me. It was that she made my son feel embarrassed of me. The way he started saying things like, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll cover that," when I never asked for help. The way he winced when I laughed too loud in public. But tonight was a new level. A public humiliation. At a table with 12 guests, including my granddaughter, Evelyn humiliated me like I was some unwanted guest at my own birthday. And my son? He sipped his wine. Quiet, unmoving. I finally turned off the engine. The house lights were still on upstairs. Probably the kitchen. Probably Evelyn cleaning up from the after party I was not invited to. I didn't even bother to go upstairs. I walked straight around the back, used my old key to the basement door, and entered the place I now called home. 4 steps, a rug that never stayed in place, a flickering lamp I never replaced. My little sanctuary of silence. Evelyn called it the dungeon. My son called it temporary. But for 5 years, it was where I had my tea, my books, my peace. I kicked off my shoes and sank into the armchair, the one with the frayed armrest I kept meaning to patch. The old quilt my mother made was still draped over the back. I pulled it over me like armor, and for the first time in years, I let my tears come freely. I cried, not because of what she said, but because he let her. He let her say it. He let her mean it. There's a certain kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream. It doesn't shatter windows or slam doors. It just sinks. Slow, heavy, like sediment in water. That's what it felt like. The weight of invisibility. Like I was vanishing piece by piece and no one was noticing. Or maybe worse, they noticed and didn't care. I don't remember falling asleep. But I woke up on the armchair quilt, wrapped tight, light still on. My back ached and my mouth was dry. But I knew even before my eyes fully opened, something had changed. Something inside me wasn't broken. It was awake. And in that quiet room, I whispered the words that would start it all. No more. The morning after my birthday, I moved slowly. Every movement felt deliberate, like I was wading through water. My knees ached more than usual, and the cold floor bit at my feet. But there was no rush. No one was waiting on me. No breakfast being set out. No warm voices from upstairs. Just the sound of Evelyn's heels clicking above me and cabinets opening and slamming. I sat at the small table near the window and stirred my tea, watching the steam rise like smoke from something burnt out. I didn't touch my toast, just stared out at the brittle lawn. Evelyn had insisted on fake grass for the front, but the backyard still carried my touch patches of soil I'd tended to for years. There was a tree my son and I planted when he was 10, a maple. It had grown tall, proud, stubborn, just like I thought he'd turned out to be. But now I wondered if it had grown in spite of the soil around it. Memories hit like quiet punches. The way he used to wait for me after school, running into my arms. How he'd leave little notes in my purse. I love you, Mom. Forever. I'd kept them. Every one. In a small box wrapped in a scarf in my closet. Proof that once he saw me, once I mattered. I spent that day mostly in silence. Didn't answer the phone. Didn't check messages. I didn't want apologies, not the kind that came too late anyway. I needed space. And maybe I needed to remember. So I dug out an old photo album from the bottom drawer. The cover was cracked corners, frayed, but it still smelled faintly of lavender, my mother's perfume. Each page was a story. My son's first day at school, the cake I made with one candle, his high school graduation, that photo of him asleep on my lap at age 12 after his appendix surgery. I remember the way he gripped my wrist like a child, even as he tried to be brave. Those were the years we were everything to each other. Before the title, Mom began to feel like an obligation to him. When he met Evelyn, I was cautious, not cold, just reserved. She was polished, always spoke in sound bites like she was performing. I offered kindness. She offered tolerance. She smiled at me the way someone smiles at a confused customer in a store. The day they told me they were getting married, I smiled too, because I knew he loved her. And loving him meant making space, even if that space pushed me to the edges. But the pushing never stopped. At first, it was subtle, a change in tone, fewer invitations, a Christmas card where my name was listed last after the dog. Then came the renovations. Evelyn wanted the kitchen redone, the guest room repurposed. My things were slowly boxed and moved to the basement. My old piano sold, my late husband's chair donated. One day, I came home and the entire upstairs felt like a stranger's house. But I didn't complain. I told myself this was part of aging, of being a good mother, of not being a burden. Then came the years when my son stopped calling me mom and started calling me ma. Like I was something old, misplaced. I brushed it off, smiled through dinners, complimented Evelyn's cooking, even when it tasted like nothing. I bit my tongue when she corrected me in front of guests. I played the part, but every act has an ending. And that birthday, that insult, that was my final curtain. The next day, Evelyn didn't come downstairs. Not to check, not to apologize, just silence. I could hear the clink of her spoon in her latte upstairs. Business as usual. My son was likely already at the clinic. He never noticed when I was gone. Never asked if I needed anything. I was just background, like the lamp in the hallway. But now that something in me had shifted, I started seeing things differently, remembering things I had let slide. Like how Evelyn had insisted I sign over access to my retirement account years ago, just in case anything ever happens. Or how the mail started arriving late, especially the bank letters. Or how my granddaughter's sweet little Rose had started using words like, Nana's forgetful, even though I never was. I wasn't losing my mind. They were slowly rewriting it. That realization didn't bring anger. It brought clarity. A chilling kind of stillness. Like when you finally see the storm cloud that's been hovering over you for years. And I knew then I needed to reclaim something. Not out of revenge, but survival. I didn't raise myself from the ashes of widowhood to be erased in someone else's home. I didn't survive the lean years, the loneliness, the grief of losing the man I loved to become a prop in someone else's curated life. So I started writing. Small notes, a journal tucked behind the false panel in the cabinet downstairs. I wrote down everything I remembered. Dates, names, passwords I had shared, conversations overheard. I wasn't sure why at first. Maybe to remind myself it was real, that I wasn't imagining it. But soon, it became something else. A blueprint. It had been years since I'd looked at the deed to the house, but I remembered clear as day that my name was on it. Not Evelyn's, not even his. Just mine and my late husband's. I remembered the trust fund his grandfather had left, the one with the clause about family continuity. I remembered the life insurance policy I took out when I was 42, the one no one else ever asked about. I remembered everything. They thought I was old, irrelevant, harmless. But they forgot I was the one who built the foundation they were now trying to bury me under. And I was done being buried. I started quietly. Not out of fear, but purpose. The kind of silence that knows what it's doing. The kind of silence that listens more than it speaks. I woke earlier than usual, made my tea, sat in the same chair. But I listened to the footsteps above me, the tone in their voices, the way Evelyn laughed differently when she was lying, the way my son cleared his throat when he was nervous. I noticed it all. Because when they stopped seeing me, I started seeing them for who they really were. That morning, I retrieved the lockbox from the back of my closet. The key was hidden in the lining of an old handbag, one no one would ever bother to touch. Inside that box were documents they'd long forgotten existed. The original deed to the house, signed and notarized with both mine and my husband's names. There had never been a transfer. We had talked about it, but never did it. Evelyn's voice echoed in my head how she always referred to the house as our property. But it wasn't. Not legally. It never had been. I held that paper like it was a weapon. Not for destruction, but for remembrance. Because I hadn't lost everything. They just made me believe I had. I spent that week sorting through papers. Insurance forms, financial statements, even the box of letters my husband wrote to me while he was overseas. Some were romantic, some just full of daily updates. But a few were about the future, about what he hoped I'd do with the life we were building. He always believed I was stronger than I thought. "Don't shrink, Ellie," one of the letters said. "Even when they try to box you in, you're bigger than walls." I held that letter to my chest and breathed for the first time in days. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, quietly, an old friend from the church group. She met me at a diner 2 towns over. No digital trail. I brought everything in a canvas bag: the deed, the trust documents, the power of attorney I had signed, but never activated. She looked over it all carefully. Her eyes widened more than once. She didn't say much at first, just flipped pages, jotted down notes. Then she looked at me, her voice low and steady, and said, "Ellie, you've got more leverage here than you think. A lot more." That night, I slept better than I had in months, maybe years. I didn't confront them. Not yet. That wasn't the plan. I needed patience. I needed precision. So I smiled more, stayed out of their way. I complimented Evelyn on her cooking again, asked my son how work was, played the role they expected. Let them think I was still that dim, aging woman in the basement with her yarn and tea and old stories. But every time Evelyn mentioned remodeling or getting the place appraised, I felt a little thrill inside. Let them talk. Let them plan. Let them pretend. The first real shift came when I intercepted a letter addressed to me. One from the insurance company. It had been opened poorly resealed. My name was barely visible under the torn adhesive. The contents were harmless, just a policy update. But it told me everything I needed to know. Evelyn had been opening my mail. Probably for years. Probably under the assumption that I'd never notice. Or that I wouldn't do anything if I did. The second shift came when I overheard Evelyn in the kitchen on a phone call. "We're gonna get her out one way or another," she whispered. "She's practically useless. David won't even notice. She just takes up space." Then a pause. Laughter. "Of course the house will be in our name eventually. That's the plan." That was the moment I stopped feeling sad. I started feeling ready. The next day, I began keeping a log. Times, dates, conversations. I made copies of everything and stored them on a small USB drive tucked into a hollowed-out book. I even documented moments that didn't seem significant yet. Evelyn changing passcodes on the upstairs Wi-Fi. My son forgetting to refill my medication. Small things. But when you stack enough small things together, it forms a pattern. I also began visiting a new bank. Opened an account in my maiden name. Moved small sums at first. Nothing they'd notice. But I knew the big transfer would come soon. I needed everything in place before that happened. Then something unexpected happened. Rose, my granddaughter, snuck downstairs one evening. She was 7 then. Hair always in braids. Big, curious eyes like her father had when he was that age. She sat on my lap and asked Nana, "Why don't you come to dinner anymore?" I felt a lump in my throat, because sometimes I said softly, "Grown-ups forget how to be kind." She looked up at me and whispered, "Mom says you're sad all the time." I smiled at her and said, "Sometimes sad people are just waiting for their light to come back." She hugged me then. Tight. And before she went back up the stairs, she turned and said, "I like your room better than ours." That night, I added something new to the plan. Protection for her. She was the only one who still saw me, who hadn't learned to ignore me. And I wasn't going to let her be raised by people who believed love was measured by usefulness. The final piece clicked into place when I found the last envelope in my file. A letter from the lawyer handling my mother's estate. Years ago, I had inherited a small property in Vermont, a lake cabin forgotten and tax dormant. I'd paid the dues every year without thinking. But now, it was more than a cabin. It was escape. It was mine, and they didn't even know it existed. So I circled a date on my calendar 3 weeks from now. That would be the day I vanished from their lives. But not before reminding them exactly who I was. I didn't pack much at first, just a few things here and there. A scarf folded into my purse. My photo album slipped between old knitting patterns. No one noticed. Evelyn never came downstairs unless she wanted to borrow something from my pantry shelves. My son was working longer hours at the clinic, distracted and always tired. I think he believed that as long as I stayed quiet, I was content. That's how he coped with denial. But I wasn't content. I was calculating. Each night, I sat at my small desk, copying documents and sealing them in manila envelopes. One set was mailed to my lawyer. Another set went into the hollowed-out book with the USB drive. I even made a third copy and stored it in a weatherproof bag at the bottom of the old garden bed beneath the maple tree my son and I planted when he was 10. I buried it there myself, under the cover of darkness, kneeling into the damp soil, with trembling hands and an unwavering will. The cabin in Vermont needed some repairs. I made a call to a handyman, using a name I hadn't spoken in years, Ellie Carver, my maiden name. It felt good, like I was stepping into a version of myself that I had buried a long time ago. The man on the phone said the roof needed patching and the furnace might be old. I told him I didn't care. Just make it livable, I said. I'm coming home. 2 weeks before my departure, Evelyn invited friends over for dinner. I wasn't asked to join. Of course not, but I could hear them from the basement. Their voices traveled through the vents, laughs, jokes, wine glasses clinking. Then Evelyn's voice, louder than the rest, said, "She's just taking up square footage. We've already talked to a real estate agent." I froze. Square footage, as if I were drywall. The next day, I quietly visited the courthouse, checked the title on the house, still mine, still untouched. She had no idea. My husband had once said, "Ellie, never give up the ground beneath your feet." I was beginning to understand what he meant. I took the bus across town to a small financial office. My lawyer and I finalized the transfer of my insurance policy and locked in a new will. The clause was crystal clear. My son and Evelyn would receive nothing, not a dime. My granddaughter Rose would inherit a small trust sealed inaccessible until she turned 21 and away from their influence. The cabin would go to her as well, under a private trust name. Everything else, liquidated asset savings retirement funds, would be donated to 2 organizations close to my heart, one that helped single mothers and one that built homes for widows. A week before I left, I cooked dinner for myself and brought a plate upstairs quietly, uninvited. I placed it on the kitchen table as Evelyn typed furiously on her phone. "What's this?" she asked, barely looking up. "Just wanted to cook for you," I said with a smile. "It's been a while." She stared at me for a long second, probably trying to decode my sudden politeness. I had learned something important about Evelyn. She didn't know how to react to kindness she didn't control. She mumbled a thanks and didn't touch the food. But I saw the doubt in her eyes. The next day, my son asked if I was feeling all right. That was rare. I told him I was just reflecting. 64 is a strange age, I said. It makes you think about the kind of legacy you'll leave. He nodded, distracted, scrolling through something on his phone. I stared at him for a long time, remembering the boy he once was. The boy who used to hold my hand in public without shame. That boy was gone. 3 days before I left a small note in Rose's backpack. Just a folded paper with a message, "I love you. Always remember that." I didn't sign it. I knew she'd know. That night, she came downstairs and asked if I had seen her pink eraser. "No," I said softly, "but check the front pocket. Maybe there's a surprise." She did, and when she read the note, her eyes lit up. She didn't say a word. just smiled and squeezed my hand. That was all I needed. The night before my departure, I made my final move. I slipped the final envelope onto the kitchen counter addressed to my son. Inside was a single sheet, a notarized document stating the legal ownership of the house and the updated will. Attached was a copy of the trust formation for Rose. I also included one photo the three of us long ago before Evelyn. I circled my son's face in red ink and wrote, "I gave you everything. You let her take it." Then I walked upstairs, not to fight, not to plead, just to say goodbye. Evelyn was in the living room, half asleep with a glass of wine. My son was on the recliner, eyes on the television. I stood at the threshold of that space and said, "I won't be here tomorrow." They both looked at me. My son blinked. "What do you mean I'm leaving?" Evelyn laughed. "Where are you going to go?" I smiled. Home. Neither of them understood, but they knew better than to ask more. The next morning, I left before sunrise. The air was cold but clean. I carried just 2 bags, my scarf, my books, my records. Everything else stayed behind. I didn't say goodbye to Rose too painful, but I knew she'd understand one day. The taxi pulled up right on time. I didn't look back. When we reached the edge of town, I asked the driver to pull over by the lake. The water was still almost mirror-like. I stepped out, stood by the edge, and took a breath that felt like it came from a life I'd forgotten. Freedom doesn't roar. It whispers. And that morning, it whispered to me. The cabin sat just beyond a winding gravel road, framed by birch trees and a stretch of wild grass that bent gently in the summer wind. It looked smaller than I remembered, dusty, weathered, untouched, but it didn't matter. It was mine. Every cracked window, every creaking board, every scent of cedar and thyme, it all belonged to me. I stood on the porch for a moment before unlocking the door, taking in the quiet. Real quiet. Not the kind where people whisper above your head or slam cupboards to prove a point. This was peace. The inside smelled like old books and forgotten winters. The handyman had done a good job. The roof no longer leaked. The furnace hummed to life when I turned the knob. There was even a vase of wildflowers left on the windowsill, maybe a gesture from him. I stood in the middle of the room, letting silence wrap around me like a shawl. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy. Not yet. But because I had done it. I had taken myself back. Over the next week, I settled in. Swept floors. Cleaned cabinets. Lined shelves with spices and herbs I hadn't used in years. Every corner I touched felt like reclaiming a version of myself I had let Evelyn and my son erode. There were nights I sat by the fire and listened to the trees. No voices, no shame, no one asking why I wasn't smiling or hinting that I'd overstayed my welcome. Just me, and the sound of freedom breathing in the walls. On the 8th day, I finally got a message from my son. The first in over a week. It was short. Just 5 words. "Where are you? Call me." I didn't. Not out of cruelty, but because he didn't deserve that version of me anymore. The one who dropped everything to reassure him, to soothe his guilt before he even had to feel it. I turned my phone off and went outside. Picked blueberries from the edge of the trail. Watched a deer cross the path just 30 feet from where I stood. I whispered, "Thank you," into the trees. And maybe it was silly, but I felt like they whispered back. A few days later, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a voicemail. A real letter. Handwritten. From Evelyn. I recognized her handwriting, neat, slanted, almost too perfect. It began with, "I don't know what you're trying to prove, but this is childish. You walking out like this is selfish. David is worried sick. Rose keeps asking about you. She cried the other night. if you care at all, come back and stop making this harder than it needs to be. There was no, I'm sorry. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. No reflection. Just blame. Guilt. A tug on old heartstrings she thought still worked. I read the letter 3 times. Then I burned it in the fireplace. A week passed before the next one came. This time from my son. Longer, more measured. He wrote, "Mom, I know things haven't been easy. I know Evelyn can be strong-willed. Maybe I should have stood up more. But you've always been the strong one, the one who held us together. I miss you. Rose misses you. Please come home, or at least tell me where you are." I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. He still didn't get it. I had been strong for everyone my whole life. But strength doesn't mean carrying people who keep cutting into you. It doesn't mean staying in places that starve your soul just because others depend on your silence. Sometimes, strength is walking away. Sometimes, it's choosing you. I didn't write him back. Instead, I wrote a new will, an updated version, one that clarified every detail. The cabin would belong to Rose, but only once she turned 25. I didn't want Evelyn selling it for profit. The funds from my accounts would be filtered into staggered trusts. The charities were already notified. My lawyer told me it was airtight. No loopholes, she said. You've made sure of that. Then one morning, the phone rang. It was Rose. My heart nearly stopped when I heard her voice. "Hi, Nana," she said, timid and small. "Are you mad at me?" I sat down on the old wooden bench by the window, holding the phone with both hands. "Oh, baby. No, never. I could never be mad at you." She sniffled. "Mom said you're gone forever." "No," I whispered. "I'm never really gone. You just have to know where to find me." She was quiet for a moment. "I drew a picture of you. I put it under my pillow." I swallowed hard. "That's where I'll always be." Then softly she said, "I miss you. I don't like how they talk about you." My hand trembled. "I miss you too. So much." She didn't ask me to come back. I think she understood more than she let on. Before we hung up, she asked, "Will I see you again?" I smiled even through the tears. "Someday, when you're older, I'll be waiting." After we hung up, I went outside, sat on the porch, watched the wind ripple across the lake. The sky was bruised with storm clouds, but I wasn't afraid. Storms don't scare you after you've lived inside one for years. Later that evening, I found myself humming a song I hadn't sung since my husband died. One we used to play in the car during long drives. I could almost hear his voice, low and steady, singing the harmony. And I whispered, "I did it, love." I found myself again. That night, I made tea, lit a candle, and pulled out my old photo album. I added a new picture to it, a Polaroid I had taken of the lake. On the back, I wrote she left with nothing, and found everything. The following week brought the first real silence from them. No letters, no calls, no messages. At first, I wondered if something had happened, if they'd finally grasped what I'd done. But after a few days, I understood. The silence wasn't regret. It was strategy. They were trying to wait me out, hoping I'd crawl back, hoping I'd miss the noise enough to mistake it for love. But I didn't. I had peace now. And I wasn't about to trade it back for crumbs of acceptance. One morning, as I sipped my tea on the porch, I saw a car pull up down the long gravel road. Not close enough to reach the cabin, just close enough to watch. It stayed for 5, maybe 6 minutes. Then it backed away and left. No one got out, but I recognized the car. It was David's. My son. He had found the property. Or maybe Evelyn had. I wasn't sure which. But they didn't knock, didn't approach, just watched and left. That told me all I needed to know. They weren't here for apologies. They were here to calculate, to see what they could still salvage. The next day, I drove into town, visited the local market, bought Peach's cinnamon, a few books from the little store by the post office. The cashier was a young woman named Emily. She reminded me of myself decades ago, curious, gentle, warm. We spoke about the weather, the river festival coming up, and before I left, she handed me a flyer for a book club. "We meet every Thursday," she said. "You should come. We don't bite." I went, not because I wanted company, but because I wanted to remember who I used to be when I had a name of my own outside of wife, mother, ghost. The women there were kind, funny, worn in their own ways like soft denim. We read books I'd never heard of, and I listened more than I spoke. But when I did speak, they listened. Not like Evelyn with her fake smile and wandering eyes. These women leaned in, asked questions, laughed at my dry humor. One of them, Joan, even said, "You're sharper than a pine needle." I hadn't been called sharp in years. At the end of the meeting, they asked about my story. I told them bits, not all, just enough. Joan placed a hand over mine and said, "You got out. That's something." I nodded. "It's everything." That night, back in the cabin, I found myself writing again. Not logs, not letters, just thoughts, reflections. I wrote about what it meant to disappear on purpose. How sometimes you don't lose your identity, you surrender it, piece by piece, until you forget it was ever yours. And then one day, you hear someone call your name, not the name others gave you, but the one buried inside. And you wake up, not bitter, not angry, just ready. A few weeks passed, then a letter arrived, no return address. Inside was a single sentence. I read the documents. "I understand now. I'm sorry. No name." But the handwriting was his. I sat with that letter for a long time. I didn't cry, didn't rush to reply. I just stared at it and tried to feel something. But all I felt was distance, like the words had come from a ship already sunk. They weren't meant to rebuild anything. They were an echo, a ghost whispering from the house I used to haunt. I folded it, placed it in the same hollowed book with the rest. Then I went outside and tended the garden. By now, the wildflowers I had planted were blooming messy and unrestrained. The way I used to be. The way I wanted to be again. I spent the afternoon repotting them, pressing my hands into the soil, not caring about the dirt under my nails. There was something healing about the earth. It didn't ask questions. It didn't care about your past. It just let you start over. That night, a storm rolled in. Heavy rain. Thunder that cracked through the trees like old bones. I sat by the window and lit a candle. Watched the shadows flicker on the walls. There was no fear. No panic. Just a strange comfort in knowing I had weathered worse. Inside myself. Inside that house. At midnight, I walked barefoot to the edge of the porch and stood under the overhang. Let the rain mist my face. I closed my eyes and whispered, "You don't own me anymore." I didn't mean Evelyn. I meant the version of myself that had shrunk. The one who stayed silent. Who let them treat her like a relic. She was gone, and the woman who stood there in the rain was something entirely new. The next morning, I wrote a letter to Rose, a real letter, with a stamp, addressed to the school's P.O. box, not the house. I had found it through a simple search. She was 9 now, old enough to read between lines. The letter was short. "My sweet girl, I miss you every day. You are brave and bright and kind. Hold on to those things no matter who tries to take them. I'm always with you, even when you can't see me. Love, Nana." I didn't say where I was. but I enclosed a pressed flower from my garden. And I knew when she opened it, she would know. She would feel it. That evening, I sat on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea. The sun dipped low, painting the lake in gold. Birds chirped. The trees swayed gently. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and I realized something. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology shouted in front of guests or a sobbing phone call begging for forgiveness. I had something better. I had silence. And inside that silence was peace. A month passed before I heard from them again. Another envelope. Thick. Heavy. The handwriting wasn't David's, this time it was Evelyn's. Elegant cursive, the kind she probably learned in some private school, where no one ever had to do dishes or say they were sorry. I stood in the kitchen of the cabin, envelope in hand, debating whether I even wanted to open it. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I peeled the flap slowly and unfolded the letter. It wasn't rage. It wasn't an apology either. It was desperation dressed as dignity. Ellie, it began. I know we've never seen eye to eye. Maybe we never will. But things have changed. She didn't say what that meant right away. Just went on about how David hasn't been himself lately, and the clinic might not survive another fiscal quarter, and how Rose asks about you constantly, which is starting to affect her schoolwork. Then the punchline, I know the house is technically still in your name. We understand that now. We respect it. But maybe we could talk about options. Maybe there's a way we can all move forward together. Together. She really had the nerve to write that word. I sat down with the letter and stared out the window at the lake, so still it looked like glass. I thought about the house. How every inch of it still smelled faintly of the lavender polish I used when David was little. How my sewing machine had sat in that corner before Evelyn replaced it with an espresso bar. I thought about the basement, the place they'd tucked me away in like a secret they were ashamed of. They only remembered me now because they were sinking. Not because they missed me. Not because they loved me. But because I still owned the life raft. I didn't write back. Instead, I called my lawyer. Let's begin the full transfer, I said. To the charities, she asked. No, I said slowly. To the new trust. For Rose. I want her future locked down tight. Nothing they can touch. I want her to have a way out even if she never takes it. My lawyer sighed, that kind of satisfied breath people let out when something just clicks into place. Already in motion. She'll be protected. That night, I lit a candle and made dinner chicken and rosemary, the kind my husband used to make on cold nights. I set 2 plates out of habit. One stayed empty. But I liked the ritual of it. The memory, not of Evelyn, not of my son, but of the man who used to call me my anchor. He wouldn't have let this happen to me. But even if he had, he would have been proud I clawed my way out. In the middle of the night, I woke to a sound. A knock. Not the loud kind, just a soft, hesitant tap. I reached for the lamp and flicked it on, slipped into my robe and crept toward the door. Another knock. I opened it, and there she was. Evelyn. No makeup, no heels. Hair pulled back, eyes red. She stood there, arms crossed against the cold, a look on her face I had never seen before, uncertainty. Please, she said. Can we talk? I didn't say yes. But I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of the old rocking chair, barely making eye contact. I didn't offer her tea. I didn't ask what she wanted. I just waited. She took a shaky breath. He's not okay. I didn't answer. I know you think we're awful people, and maybe we were. I was. I don't know anymore. Still, I waited. She finally looked up. I'm not asking for money or the house. I need to know what you want from us so we can fix this. And there it was again, that assumption that I could be bought. that I had a price. I spoke quietly. I don't want anything from you, Evelyn. She blinked. Then why? Because I wanted something for me, for the first time in a very long time. Silence filled the room. She stared at the candle. The flames danced in her eyes, and for a moment I thought I saw something break in her. I didn't mean for it to get that bad, she whispered. It just happened slowly. You were always so quiet. That was your mistake, I said. Thinking quiet meant weak. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. Eventually she stood. I won't come again, she said. I just thought you deserved to hear it, that I'm sorry. For what I did, for what I said that night. I didn't respond. She turned to leave, hand on the doorknob. Just as she opened it, I said, I left everything behind not to punish you, but because I didn't recognize who I'd become in that house. And I was afraid I'd lose the last piece of myself if I stayed. She paused, then nodded once and left. I stood by the door long after it closed. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't angry, or smug, or sad. I was still. That was the first time I felt something like closure. Not because she said sorry, but because I didn't need her to. The next morning came quietly, like most mornings do in the cabin. The rain had passed some time in the night, leaving behind a silver sheen over the grass and a fog that curled low across the lake like smoke from a forgotten fire. I stood at the window for a while, just watching it move. That was the thing about silence out here. It didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of thought, full of breath, full of all the parts of me I had silenced for too long. I didn't think much about Evelyn's visit until I sat with my tea. Then it all came back the way she looked smaller, not physically, but in spirit. The way her voice had none of its usual venom. And how strange it felt to finally hear the words I once begged for, and feel nothing in return. Not joy, not satisfaction, just stillness. It was like reaching the top of a long climb and realizing the view wasn't what you expected, but it was enough. I spent that day organizing old recipes. Something simple, something grounding. I clipped them into a binder, rewrote them in neater handwriting. Some were mine, some were my mother's, and a few were ones I used to make for David when he was little. I wondered if he remembered the cinnamon cornbread or the way I used to press a little heart into his sandwiches with a cookie cutter. I hadn't done that for years before he met Evelyn. Maybe that's when things started shifting, when I started letting myself fade just a little too much. Around lunchtime, a letter arrived, this time with a return address. It was from the clinic, not a form letter. Handwritten again. David. He had never been a writer, never liked saying much unless he had to. But this letter was different. The handwriting was messy, words scratched out, ink a little smudged, like maybe he wrote it late at night, tired, unsure of what to say. Mom, I don't know if you'll even read this, but I hope you do. I think you were right to leave. I don't know what happened to me. I let her talk over you. I let myself forget the kind of woman who raised me. I let myself get too comfortable in her shadow, and I hate that it took you disappearing for me to see it. Things haven't been good. Not just with Evelyn. With me. The clinic's in trouble. I drink too much. I can't sleep. Rose doesn't talk to us much anymore. I think she's mad at me, but she won't say it. She just hugs her stuffed animals and goes quiet when we ask about school. I don't want anything from you. I just wanted to say, I see it now. What I did, what I let happen. I don't know if we can ever fix it, but if there's a way, even a small one, I'd do anything to try. Your son, David. I folded the letter and placed it next to the one from Evelyn, both of them written too late. But that didn't make them worthless. Just delayed truths. And delayed truths don't erase pain. They just open the window a little, let in the air. That night, I wrote a letter of my own. David, I loved you before you ever said your first word. I loved you when you were a fever in my arms, a scraped knee on a schoolyard, a man in a white coat with tired eyes. I have never stopped loving you, even in silence, even in exile. But love doesn't mean forgetting yourself, and motherhood isn't meant to be martyrdom. You let her take pieces of me one at a time, and I let you. That's on both of us. I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not coming back either. This place, this quiet, it saved me. I hope you find something that saves you too. Rose still has a future with me when she's ready. That door will never close. Take care of yourself, David. And if nothing else, remember the woman who taught you to stand on your own. Love, Mom. I mailed it the next morning. At the post office, Emily, the kind cashier, asked if I'd be attending the garden fair that weekend. I told her I'd think about it. You should, she said. There's going to be music and that pie contest you asked about. I smiled. I had forgotten about the pie contest. For the first time in months, I felt something flicker. Not warmth exactly, but interest, curiosity, maybe even hope. I spent the afternoon baking again, not for anyone, just for the scent, for the way flour sticks to your hands and makes you feel real. I tried a new crust old filling, cinnamon apple with cloves and lemon, the kind I hadn't made since the Christmas before David's wedding. I remembered that day how Evelyn took one bite and said, "It's rustic." I had laughed, but it stayed with me. The way people weaponize words when they want to seem polite. This pie had no audience, no judgment, just me and the sound of the crust crackling as it cooled. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, just one glass, sat on the porch, and watched fireflies rise from the grass like little stars that had changed their minds about the sky. I remembered being a girl again, 10 years old, barefoot in my grandmother's field, chasing them with an old mason jar. I remembered who I was before I gave all my light away, and for once, I didn't miss anyone. Not the version of my son that lived in the shadows. Not Evelyn. Not the woman I had once tried so hard to be just to keep peace in a house that never wanted it. I missed no one, but I felt everything. The stillness, the strength, the truth. I had not run away from my life. I had walked into it. The garden fair arrived with more color than I expected, banners strung between trees, tables covered in homemade jams, soaps, pies lined up like trophies from people who remembered how to make things with their hands. It was the kind of gathering I used to avoid. Too many people, too many reasons to smile when I didn't want to. But this time, I felt something different. I felt like I belonged, not to anyone else, but to myself. I wore a soft blue sweater and my favorite old earrings, simple gold loops that had once belonged to my mother. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting the sun soak into my shoulders, listening to conversations that weren't about me or my worth or what I did wrong. It was all laughter and garden tips and children running wild between booths. Emily spotted me first. She waved with both hands and pointed me toward the pie table. "We saved a spot for you," she said. "And I saw a couple of people eyeing that cinnamon apple you brought in earlier. It smells like autumn wrapped in a memory." I laughed. For real. That soft kind of laugh you forget how to do when you've been hurt too long. I didn't stay near the contest table. Didn't need to. I found a shaded bench near the lavender plants and watched from a distance. A young couple sat down beside me. The woman was expecting. Her hands rested on her belly like a promise. The man fed her bites of a tart, laughing when she made a sour face. They didn't notice me, but I noticed them. Not with envy, with peace. Life would go on. Babies would be born. Gardens would bloom. Even if I wasn't part of their world, I wasn't missing anything. An hour later, Emily ran up breathless and beaming. "You won second place," she said, holding out a little ribbon. "The judges said your crust tasted like it came from someone who knows what heartbreak smells like." I took the ribbon in my hand and stared at it, smiling. Second place. Not perfection, but something earned, something seen. That night, I placed the ribbon on my mantel, right beside a small wooden frame I had carved weeks earlier. Inside it was a photo Rose had drawn, a crayon sketch of two stick figures, one tall, one small, both holding hands in front of a little red house. On the back, she'd written Nana and me. A storm rolled in after midnight, rain thudding soft against the windows. I didn't turn on music, didn't reach for a book, just sat with it. The quiet, the thunder, the way the world shakes when it's letting something go. The next morning brought something unexpected. An email from Rose. I hadn't given her my address, but she was clever like her father had been. The subject line simply said, "Hi." Inside was just a few lines. "Nana, Mom doesn't know I'm writing this. I found your email in the recipe book. I just wanted to tell you I'm okay. I started my own garden at school. They let us plant sunflowers. I miss you every day. I hope I can come see you someday. I remember the lake. Love, Rose." I read it 4 times. Then I closed my laptop and walked outside barefoot on the dewy grass, heart too full for words. Later that week, a woman from the book club named Joan invited me to her sister's cottage for a small dinner party. "Nothing fancy," she said. "Just some good wine and people who won't ask you to explain your existence." I accepted. And that night, surrounded by women with laugh lines and stories etched into their eyes, I felt it again, that feeling of return. Not to the past, but to myself. The version of me that laughed with her mouth wide open. The one who didn't apologize for taking up space. When the night ended, Joan hugged me. Tight. "You're not a ghost anymore," she whispered, and I believed her. A few weeks later, I received a formal letter from my lawyer confirming the finalization of the trust. Rose's name was locked in, ironclad. Evelyn and David were legally barred from accessing a single cent. The cabin would pass to her on her 25th birthday, assuming she still wanted it. And even if she didn't, she'd know it had always been meant for her. I wrote a second letter to accompany the trust. "Rose, this place saved me. Maybe someday it will save you too. Or maybe you'll just come here to breathe. To think. To remember that someone in this world loved you for exactly who you are. No expectations, no conditions, just love. That kind of love is rare, and I hope you carry it with you always. Nana." I sealed it in a silver envelope and placed it in my lawyer's hands. "Only give this to her when she's ready," I said. Not before. On a Thursday, in late September, I returned to the lake. Not to sit, but to scatter. I brought the old letters from Evelyn and David, burned them by the water, watched the smoke twist into the sky. I didn't feel rage, just release. Then I took a handful of dried lavender and let it fall into the wind. Not for them, for me, a final offering. The next morning, I woke to a new routine. Tea, sunlight, a notebook half filled with stories. Not about the pain, but about everything after. The quiet triumphs, the soft victories, the second place ribbon, the surprise emails, the strength I found in stillness. I wrote the last line of my journal that day. They thought I was fading, but I was just beginning. And I meant every word. The trees began to change by the first week of October. Golds, ambers, deep crimsons that seemed to drip from the leaves like fire. I walked the trail by the lake every morning, now a scarf around my neck, and my thoughts folded neatly in my pockets. There was a peace in that rhythm, in the way life returned to itself season after season without asking permission. I realized then, that's what I had done too. I had come back to myself like autumn returning to the trees, not sudden, not loud, but certain. I began volunteering at the small community center on Tuesdays. Nothing big, just helping stock food shelves, write labels, sort donations. The women there were kind and direct, their stories stitched together with both sorrow and survival. One of them, Linda, had lost her husband to cancer and her son to a courtroom. She called herself the unlucky one. But the way she laughed lit up a room like nothing I'd ever seen. We became quiet friends. Two women who had loved deeply and been forgotten gently. Or so we thought. One Tuesday, as I stacked cans of beans into rows, I noticed a girl standing near the back door. Pale green hoodie. Black boots too big for her. She was maybe 15, maybe 17, and shaking in a way that wasn't from cold. She didn't ask for anything. She just stood there like someone afraid they'd be chased away for wanting to be seen. I walked over, quietly, gently, and I said, "There's hot soup in the kitchen. No one needs to ask here." Her eyes met mine for half a second before she nodded and followed me in. That's all it took. No lecture, no questions, just kindness with no terms. I learned her name was Danny, that her parents had kicked her out, that she had nowhere to go. I didn't pry. I just sat with her as she ate. I remembered how it felt to be invisible, to be somewhere people measured you by how quiet you could be. I wouldn't let her feel that here. I didn't bring her home. I wasn't foolish. But I brought her a pair of clean gloves the next day and a coat I'd once bought on impulse. She took them without words. But I saw the way her fingers lingered on the fabric, like maybe she hadn't felt softness in a long time. That night, I wrote again. Not a journal, a story. The first I'd started in years. It was about a woman who disappeared, who lived in a house by the lake and helped others find their way not with directions, but with warmth. The woman in the story didn't have a name. She didn't need one. She just watched and waited. And when someone stumbled too close to the edge, she'd reach out not to pull them back, but to remind them they could stand. I sent that story to a local magazine on a whim. They published it 2 weeks later. Emily, the cashier, brought me a copy. She'd recognized my name. "Ellie Carver," she said, holding it like a gift. "That's you, right? You wrote this?" I nodded. She hugged me. I didn't pull away. My story wasn't just mine anymore. On the first snow of the season, I received one final letter from David. This one arrived in a brown envelope typed neatly, as if to say he'd thought long and hard before sending it. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. "Mom, I won't reach out again unless you want me to. I understand now. I don't know how I let it get so far. I thought I was protecting you by keeping things easy, quiet. But I see now how silence can be the loudest cruelty. Evelyn and I are separating. That's not your burden. But I think you should know. Rose is asking harder questions now. I'm not sure I always have the right answers, but I show her the notes you left. I tell her the truth. Not the one we tried to live with. The one you had the courage to walk toward. I'm proud of you. I don't know if that matters, but I needed to say it. Always, David." I folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box beside my bed. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was the first time I heard his voice as a man, not as a son asking for permission to ignore his mother's pain. The first snow stayed for days. I walked outside every morning, boot prints soft behind me, breath fogging into the crisp air. The cabin was warm, full of life now. Books stacked in every corner. Letters from Rose on the fridge, her handwriting bigger, bolder, sharper than last year. One drawing showed a woman on a porch, long hair wind all around her. She'd drawn a tiny lake beside it. "You," the note said. "You are my lighthouse." I cried reading that. Not the sharp kind of crying, just the kind that comes when healing has taken root so deep. The tears come from joy. I'd never be who I was before the hurt. That woman was gone, and that's okay. I was someone new now. Someone who knew how to walk away without burning bridges, just letting them rot in the quiet they built. Someone who no longer asked to be loved correctly, but simply chose to love herself loudly. I stood at the water's edge one last time before the new year. Wind at my back, the cabin glowing behind me like a second chance. I whispered into the cold, "I forgive you." Not to Evelyn, not to David, but to the girl I used to be, the one who stayed too long, bent too far, and broke without anyone noticing. I forgive you, and I let her go, because I had someone else now. Me, whole, standing, unapologetic. By early spring, the ice on the lake had thinned into shimmering slivers. Birds returned to the trees, their calls high and sweet in the morning. And just like the thaw, something inside me kept softening, not into weakness, but into truth. Real truth. The kind that doesn't need to be defended. I was no longer trying to convince anyone of who I was or what I'd given. I had nothing left to prove, and in that, I finally found rest. My days fell into a quiet rhythm. Mornings with tea and letters from Rose, afternoons volunteering, evenings with a book and the fireplace crackling beside me. I read slowly now, not just to absorb the story, but to feel every word settle. Life didn't rush me anymore. I was finally on my own clock. Rose's letters came more frequently, written in her rounded, confident hand. She told me about her garden, her new best friend, the book she was reading. "I'm writing a story too," she said once. "It's about a girl who lives in a lighthouse and saves people in storms." I smiled at that. She didn't know the truth of her own words yet, but one day she would. One day she'd understand the stories we write are often the ones we're living, even if we don't realize it at the time. I didn't hear from David again. He kept his word. The silence between us wasn't empty now, it was respectful. And I appreciated that. Sometimes I'd think of him during my walks. I'd wonder if he remembered how it used to be. Before Evelyn, before all the distancing. I hoped he had found a way to forgive himself, because I had already forgiven him. That was the part no one really tells you. Forgiveness doesn't mean they come back. It just means you don't take their weight with you when you go. The community center threw a spring gathering in late March. Flowers blooming in pots, kids chasing each other across the yard. Linda brought her famous lemon bars. Joan made lavender cookies. Emily played the guitar on the small stage, singing songs so sweet they made your eyes water. Someone handed me a plate and said, "You always bring the calm, Ellie." I hadn't realized I had become part of them now. Not just the woman from the lake cabin, but one of their own. I belonged. That night, I walked home under a sky so clear you could see every star. The wind was soft. My legs tired. My heart full. I stopped by the garden bed out front and crouched down. The tulips I planted months ago were just beginning to rise. Little green shoots breaking the soil. Fragile, but sure. Just like I had been. The next morning brought a small letter from the lawyer. Inside a simple line, "Trust confirmed." Transfer complete. Rose's future was safe now. The cabin, the funds, the letters all locked into place. She'd have her own escape hatch when she needed it, and when she turned 25, she'd get the key to this home. My home. The one I built from silence, pain, and quiet power. I wrote her one last letter to seal into the trust. My darling Rose, if you're reading this, you're old enough now to choose your path. This cabin is yours not because I wanted to give you property, but because I wanted to give you proof that you come from strength. You come from women who refused to disappear. I don't know where you'll be when you read this. Maybe far away, maybe right here. But know this, you are never lost if you have your name, your voice, and your story. I spent too many years letting others decide mine. Don't do the same. Come here when you need stillness. Come when you need to remember. This place was built from survival. And now, it's built for you. Love, Nana. I folded the letter carefully and gave it to the lawyer in person. Make sure she receives it when she's ready, I said, not a moment sooner. A few days later, I stood at the edge of the lake again. But this time, I wasn't searching for closure. I had already found it. This time, I was just thanking it for the solitude, for the safety, for the transformation. I watched a heron land near the water, long wings, folding like silk. And I smiled. I had become that, in a way. Graceful through pain. Still, but ready to rise when the wind was right. That evening, I made one final addition to my journal. They told me I was a burden. They told me I was forgettable. They told me I was lucky just to be allowed near them. But I was never lucky. They were. I closed the book and placed it on the shelf next to the framed ribbon from the pie contest the photo Rose drew, and a small wooden carving my husband once made for me, a bird in flight. I no longer lived in memory. I lived in presence. I sat in my chair, fire crackling, tea in hand, and stared out the window. No ghosts, no regrets, just peace. Because in the end, I didn't need revenge. I didn't need an apology shouted across a birthday table or wept at my feet. I needed freedom, and I claimed it. One quiet, steady step at a time.